So basically, cybersecurity is a set of policies, procedures, technical measures, controls, and legal measures that intends to actually preserve and secure systems, data, and technical assets from internal and external accidental or malicious threats. So in the contrary of data localization, in cybersecurity, we do have a more common description or a common definition of what cybersecurity actually means. But we are actually seeing a change in the cybersecurity framework and in the cybersecurity landscape based on the trends that we are facing right now. So as I was mentioning, cybersecurity actually is a very broad concept that covers many different single stages, but the main goal is to ensure that the data and the systems and the technical assets from the companies are secure. And that has to be aligned with international standards as well as with national and international regulation frameworks. And now that I have explained the what, how is cybersecurity regulated? So cybersecurity is not an easy new concept. It is something that has been already in the table for long ago right now. But we are seeing that right now we have a mix of regulations, laws, international standards, and even national schemes that actually companies have to overcome in order to create a cybersecurity framework that actually works for the companies that we work. And even though the different regulations and different laws and standards that we are seeing may vary from sector to sector or based on the different risk level that the systems and the data may impose, we are typically seeing the following components as the main components of cybersecurity framework. So basically, these regulations often require organizations to adopt a risk management approach, which basically means that we have to first identify, assess, and mitigate which are the potential risks that we have within the companies in order to establish the requirements that could mitigate those potential risks. On top of that, we are also seeing that one of the trends that are especially happening within the European Union is that certain industries, based on the risk level that they may impose to the different citizens, are subject to a stricter cybersecurity laws. That's, for example, the case of NIS2 directive, which is the common level of cybersecurity that companies have to establish. But if you are an entity that operates in the finance sector, you are also subject to a stricter regulation, so, for example, DORA. We are also seeing a very link to the data protection laws in the same way that GDPR, for example, requires what to do in case of a data breach. That is also covered in the cybersecurity regulations. And that is the incident reporting and resilience key component that we are seeing in all these regulations. Many frameworks mandate that incident notification is an obligation, but what we are dealing is with a very tight deadlines, and that requires organizations to actually ensure business continuity and resilience in case of these events happen. Another thing that we are seeing is that the regulators are really focused on supply chain and third-party risk. Because what we are seeing and that we are recognizing is that, and I will say most of the times, but a lot of times, third parties are the weakened link within the cybersecurity of companies and organizations. And lastly, another key component that we are seeing in this cybersecurity framework is that enforcement and accountability. So regulators may impose fines, sanctions, but what we are seeing right now is that not only fines and sanctions are being imposed, it's also that the executives can be held personally liable because of an infringement or a breach of the regulation. And that's the how. And now, why cybersecurity is a top priority for companies right now? The list is very large, but I will want to point out just a few examples of why this is a key priority for companies and why are we having this topic today. So it is not a surprise that cyber attacks are more frequent and more sophisticated and more damaging for the companies right now. And a single breach can actually cost millions in direct and indirect costs for companies. Incidents also erode customers' trust, and that can cause a lasting brand damage. So we do not have to always forget the non-direct impact of the incidents that may occur. Another thing that we are seeing is the regulatory pressure and legal liability. So as I was mentioning before, global regulations require companies to demonstrate cybersecurity and to actually train their employees, and not basically top-down employees, but also C-level employees. And lastly, what we are seeing is that cyber risk is now a boardroom issue, so it's not longer an IT issue as it was in the past. And as I was mentioning the cybersecurity framework, we are also seeing a few trends that are coming now in the globe, but especially in the European Union. So let me start with the obvious. As I was mentioning before, cybersecurity is no longer an IT issue. It is now a matter of national and economic security. And because of that, we are seeing that many different factors are challenging the way that we we're building the framework and the landscape of cybersecurity within the companies. One of the main issues is that regulatory fragmentation and complexity. Across the globe, but as I was mentioned, especially in Europe, we are seeing increasingly straitened cybersecurity regulations. And a key concern of that is the different member states may implement EU regulations in a different ways within the member states. And that creates a complexity for companies, and especially for multinational companies, who must navigate overlapping obligations, certifications, and sometimes even national schemes to actually comply with the regulations. Another key issue that we are seeing is, as I was mentioning, the straitened cybersecurity regulations. The current complex framework, with a mix of regulations, certifications, schemes, and standards, have a very open, wide terms, and that poses a challenge for a global company when actually want to demonstrate compliance with the regulation. Another trend that we are seeing, and is actually one of the key issues of this presentation, is the cloud sovereignty trend. Another trend, the EU is increasingly focusing on cloud sovereignty, and the idea is to reduce the reliance of non-EU hyperscalers, and actually to protect sensitive data and high-risk services. And as I was mentioning before, this also relies on the fact that right now the regulations are based on a legal accountability and higher sanctions. And this is a significant shift from reactive enforcement to a proactive compliance by this time approach. As well, we are seeing that over the last 10 years, the significance of critical infrastructure has grown among policymakers globally. And this conversation is heavily influenced by hybrid threats as a result of increasing attention of digital infrastructures and the business that they create for the companies. And lastly, the adoption to standards and certifications. In the EU, it is setting a global standard for cybersecurity in digital regulation. As I was mentioning, we have different examples, these two directives. We also have the Cybersecurity Act, DORA, CRA. So we have a common base for the cybersecurity in Europe. And for companies, this both present a challenge and an opportunity to actually present that we are fully compliant with the regulations. And now, in the same way that we wanted to present the main approaches to data localization and cross-border data transfers, we also wanted to present the main approach to cybersecurity. Here, the approach is a little bit different. It is not based on how difficult or strong is the regulation, but it is most based on how countries are implementing regulations in order to protect the data and the information that I was mentioning before. So we have 4 levels of commitment. Level 1 is demonstrate basic cybersecurity commitment. Moderate is the level 2. Level 3 is demonstrate a substantial cybersecurity commitment. And lastly, the level 4 is a very strong cybersecurity framework and commitment within the companies. But before dipping into some of the jurisdiction and just to highlight a few countries, it is worth mentioning that the fact of understanding these levels is essential for companies right now. Only if we understand how the different jurisdictions are establishing the requirements, we will be able to actually provide services and provide the products that we develop to our customers during the globe. So here again, we can see the different trend, but the common layer is that countries are relying on the fact that cybersecurity is a key priority for them. For example, in Europe, as I was mentioning, we already have a very strong base of cybersecurity regulations. And despite the complexity that is present, especially when overlapping with the US or the Asia-Pacific regulation, for example, this regulatory framework provides legal certainty and fosters innovations within the companies. The EU is entering a new era of transparency, requiring public disclosure of cyber incidents and governance practice, and placing greater accountability on board their members. On the other hand, we have Asia-Pacific, but more or less the approach is the same. With rapid digitalization and growing cyber threats, Asia-Pacific countries are enhancing legal frameworks to mitigate risk and secure digital economies. Each jurisdiction has tailored its approach, but the common trend is toward a secure and resilient digital environment, with emphasis on compliance, transparency, and industry accountability. One of the examples is Australia. Australia's cybersecurity landscape is being reshaped very recently by the new Cybersecurity Act, which was published in 2024. Which is a landmark piece of the legislation that aims to enhance cyber defense and addresses legislative gaps. But on top of that, we have also in Australia another key piece of legislation, which is the Australian Cybersecurity Framework for critical infrastructures, which enhances the security and resilience on Australia's critical infrastructure. as I was mentioning in the previous slide, we are seeing again the fact that critical infrastructure is also becoming a new trend and to regulate these additional sectors. What we are seeing, for example, in Africa is that in Africa they are pushing towards a stronger cybersecurity regulation and frameworks, especially that is based on the African Union's data policy framework and the Malabo Convention. Africa is actively developing a more robust cybersecurity landscape through a combination of national efforts, regional cooperation, and international collaboration. While challenges remain, increasing awareness and investment in cybersecurity are paving the way of a more secure digital future for the continent. And we can see examples of that in Ghana and Kenya. Kenya, for example, has the National Cybersecurity Strategy, positioning itself as a leader of East Africa. Kenya's also cybersecurity landscape is governed by the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act from 2018 and the Data Protection Act in 2019. These laws, along with the National Cybersecurity Strategy, aim to protect critical infrastructures, ensure data privacy, and prosecute cybercrimes. And lastly, if we go to the Americas, we have, I would say, two different approaches. So, for example, in the US, cybersecurity regulation is a mix of federal and state laws, often focusing on specific industry sectors. We can see a similar approach in Canada, with cybersecurity regulations are primarily addressing through a combination of federal and provincial laws as well, encompassing data protection, privacy, and criminal liability. And for example, in South America, what we are seeing is an approach which is leaning toward to the European perspective. That is, for example, the example of Brazil, which cybersecurity landscape is characterized by a mix of national policies, sector policy regulations, and data protection laws, which, again, relies on the GDPR approach. And now, in order to actually merge the two topics that we were discussing today, data localization and cybersecurity, we wanted to make the exercise of finding common grounds for these two pieces of regulations, which are key in the companies right now. Both cybersecurity and data localization frameworks have been presented, and there is no doubt that there is an intersection between them. So in this sense, we wanted to point it out a few highlights on where do we see these common grounds. First, there is a legal and technical fragmentation which creates isolated systems that makes cross-border compliance more complex and undermines unified cybersecurity management. Second, we are seeing that constraints on capabilities and resilience result from limits on using global providers and duplicating infrastructures across regions, weakening both prevention and response to cyber threats. The third point, uncoordinated infrastructures and restricted intelligence sharing elevate the risk of cyber attacks. And lastly, in regimes with heavy state involvement, data localization may open the door to government surveillance, unauthorized access, and lastly, the misuse of sensitive information. So in summary, what we are seeing is that it is essential to work together to address these challenges. So only then we can ensure the security of our data and the continuity of our operations within the business.